Well, with me now in the studio at Radio Enfield is the borough's local history officer, Graham Dalling. Hello, Graham. Many thanks for coming along. Now, you're actually on duty this weekend at the Friends Meeting House in Churchill, Winchmore Hill, taking part in the open house weekend. Without giving too much away, because obviously we want people to go along and see firsthand for themselves, but can you just tell us a little bit about the history behind the house?
Well, it's in fact by far the oldest nonconformist place of worship in outer North London. It goes back to 1790 and it replaces an earlier building of 1688. So there's been Quaker worship on that site without a break since 1688, possibly even longer than that. And the building is, well, the old part is remarkably untouched. There's also rather a nice burial ground there. One or two well-known names there, including several members of the Barclay family of Barclays Bank.
Right.
Barclays Bank, also Lloyd's as well, were once Quaker firms. Not now, though, I may say. They're not conducted on Quaker lines these days.
Right, so what time are you open to? Obviously, we've had one day today already, and
It'll be
tomorrow...
2 till 4:30 on both days.
Right. Is there a need to book it in advance, or can
No,
people just turn up?
the door's open, you can just wander in, and there are also refreshments available as well.
Right. Now, how far back in history is Enfield known to have existed? Do we know how long Enfield's been around as such?
Well, there've been a few prehistoric fragments have come to light. You've got these are flint implements have come up from the Lee Valley gravels. In the 1950s, a Neolithic axe head came up in a garden in Connaught Avenue. But the first signs of a definite settlement, there is extensive remains of a Roman settlement that have been excavated over the years in the Lincoln Road area. Quite a lot have come up in sort of keyhole excavations in the Leighton Road area. In fact, there's quite a lot more, I suspect, in people's gardens around that part of Enfield.
So is information about Enfield's past still coming to light then through
Always.
building work and so on?
Well, there is always new material coming up with archaeology, and also, of course, you get a lot of new documents coming to light as well. You know, as and when things are released for research and old things are rediscovered. So that you never quite know what you're going to find out.
And are people always clearing out their lofts and coming up with things as well? Does that happen?
Well, that happens, yes. What did we get recently? There was a 1928 railway time with the King's Cross suburban services. They got details of the train times out to Enfield Chase and Gordon Hill. There was a 1932 estate agent's catalogue for Munster Gardens off Hedge Lane, Palmer's Green. I think this is 1932. The houses were going for £850 each new at the time.
People were probably complaining then that they were expecting.
They were being ripped off. Yeah, write the cheque out quick. You know.
So, are there many other buildings in Enfield which you're involved with the Friends Meeting House in Churchill? There are other buildings open this weekend, but what do we know about the other old buildings in Enfield? I believe some have got connection with royalty.
Well, you have got beneath the surface of the grass in the meadow at 40 Hall, between the house and the river, the brook, Turkey Brook, there are extensive remains of Elsing. It was a house. It was a late medieval, early Tudor manor house that the royalty acquired around 1540. Had been the home of Sir Thomas Lovell. He was Henry VII's Chancellor of the Exchequer, and that was extensively used by royalty. Elizabeth stayed there on quite a few occasions, and I think it was also, I believe, Elizabeth and her brother Edward were there when news came through that their father Henry VIII had died.
Right. Okay, and are there any other famous people that have got links with Enfield?
That's almost open-ended. I'm a great scour of newspaper obituaries. It's a surprising number of people that you find. There was one recently in the Telegraph. There was an old boy of Enfield Grammar School, later a mathematics lecturer at Jesus College, Cambridge. Died recently in his 80s. It turned out he was a leading member of the Bletchley Park team who worked on the Enigma,
right.
The Enigma X scheme, decoding German intelligence.
Right, and I believe there's also a link with Guy Fawkes and the gunpowder plot as well.
Yes, well, that was one of the safe houses used by the conspirators. Was Whitewebb's. Not the present Whitewebb's, I may say. This is the original house which stood on the opposite side of Whitewebb's Lane, more or less where Whitewebb's farm is. It was certainly raided after the plot was discovered.
Right. And one subject which I think always creates interest is ghosts. Are there any sightings of ghosts in Enfield?
Personally, I've had no experience of ghosts. I have met people who have. These are people who I have reason to believe are perfectly sane and have no reason for making it up.
Right.
Couple that come to mind was a very well publicised poltergeist case in the Green Street area in the late 1970s. There was a book written on it, and there was quite a lot of coverage given in the local and national press. In fact, the press still keep coming back to that one today. Another one I've heard of, there was a phantom coach and horses seen from time to time in the Bell Lane area of Enfield Highway. Now, significantly, I think most of the sightings were late at night, more or less corresponding with the pubs closing. So
you've got nothing to verify these stories at all?
Funny enough, I've met people who have seen and heard things. I can think of, there was a couple I met some years ago living in a fairly ordinary 1920s semi-detached house in Winchmore Hill, and there was something going on in that house that was absolutely sending their dogs crazy, to the extent they had to get them tranquilised by the vet.
Right.
But the dogs were taken out of the house, no problem.
Right.
We never did succeed in discovering, though, what the source of the problem was.
Now, if people are coming along to the show in the town park tomorrow, there are quite a few places around about that are within walking distance. Perhaps they could go along to, for example, Gentleman's Row and the marketplace in Enfield. Do we know how far back these go?
Well, you've got St Andrew's Church, of course. That's open quite a lot of the time. Oldest part of that goes back to the 13th century. There's some 13th century masonry in the chancel, though I think most of it's 14th and 15th century. Well worth a visit. You've got just beside there, you've got the original building of Enfield Grammar School from the 1590s, and then you've got some rather nice collection of Victorian cottages in Holly Walk. These, of course, nowadays very highly desirable bijou residences, with the coach lamps and bow windows and things. Going back to the 19th century, in all honesty, these were slums. Census records reveal that some of these two-bedroom cottages had families with 10 or more children jammed in there.
So times have changed a little bit.
In fact, when you see a household like that, you realise why the men of that period spent their evenings in pubs rather than at home. And evening at home was not a pleasant alternative. And of course, you've got the more affluent houses who've got some real beauty, some Georgian property, some older along Gentleman's Row.
And not so far away from Gentleman's Row is the green at Enfield Chase, and I heard some stories that this is associated with the plague. Is that correct?
There is a tradition. Might just be some truth in it. The Great Plague of 1665 certainly hit Enfield. There were quite a few deaths. And we know from the church records that some of the victims were buried in places other than the churchyard. But it doesn't actually say where. And there's a strong tradition linking it with Chase Green. So it's possible.
But there's a question mark over there.
Hopefully, I would think one of these days the answer may well come from archaeology.
Right.
I know several, at least two occasions in recent years, British Gas have dug trenches across the green to lay gas mains. On both occasions, I'm at a point of watching the soil that had been dug out of these trenches. Unfortunately, though, no trace of anything that looks remotely like human remains.
Right. So there's still a question mark there.
Still a question mark. It may yet be resolved.
Do we know where the names of some parts of the borough have come from? Because some of them are quite interesting. Names like Freezy Water, Brimsdown, Ponders End. Do we know where these have come from?
We know some of them. It's a question of going back to the earliest documentary sources and trying to work it out. Freezy Water is that's not a particularly old name. It goes back to the late 18th, early 19th century, and that is an obvious allusion to the low-lying and waterlogged nature of that part of Enfield. It was originally very marshy. Ponders End, you get the place name element end is actually very common in some parts of Hertfordshire.
Right.
It means a part of the parish, and almost certainly it comes from a name of medieval landowning family called Ponder.
Right. Now, if people want to find out more about the borough's past, are there plenty of books or clubs or societies that they can
Well, you've got several societies. The Enfield Preservation Society obviously does a lot of work in this field. Then you've got my own particular interest is the Edmonton 100 Historical Society. They have regular meetings, mostly at Jubilee Hall in Parsonage Lane, on a local history theme, and there'll be also the Enfield Archaeological Society. So you've got three major organisations all working in this field.
And people can find out how to contact them through libraries.
Oh yes,
and so
yes.
on, can they?
There's a contact address is readily available. Right. And as far as books are concerned, Enfield's been very lucky. My former boss, David Pam, has written a 3-volume history of Enfield, published by the Preservation Society, still in print. He's since also written a very fine history of the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield Lock, well worth reading. My contribution is rather smaller so far. I've done 2 single-volume histories, Southgate and Edmonton Past, published in 1996, followed up by Enfield Past in 1999, both still in print, by the way.
Right, okay, yeah. So you've done your commercial now. So.
Oh yeah, thank you very much for that.
Well, Graham, many thanks for coming along. It's been very interesting finding out a little bit about Enfield's history. As you say, this is sort of an open-ended subject, really. We could spend hours talking about it, but hopefully we've given people a little bit to think about, and hopefully they'll find out a bit more and come along and see you tomorrow at the Friends Meeting House in Church Hill.
Right,
Thanks,
you very
Graham.
much.